Hello, this is John with Western Maine Defensive Tactics. Today we're going to talk about Bowie knife blades. Now, some of you might wonder why I'm doing things so ass backwards. Why do the blade now? Because you've prattled on about tangs and guards and handles and all that other stuff. Why are you doing this backwards, John? Well, because the blade is the first thing when we pick up a new knife, or even before we pick it up. We look at that blade and say, wow, that's a nice blade. I want to see it. We always look at the blade first. It's easy to examine, it's obvious, and only then sometimes we say, I like this knife, but I wish it was on a different handle. I wish the handle was a little bit like this or a little bit like that. A lot of times the handle is an afterthought to the blade, and it's something that we sometimes make compromises with because, hey, we like this blade so much, we're going to live with a handle that's not ideal for us. And in particular, tangs get short shrift. They get ignored or brushed aside as something that's elementary, or assumed that they have an adequate tang, things like that. But talking about blades, first thing we're going to talk about is steel. I much prefer carbon steel for a Bowie knife. I like the edge retention, the toughness, the flexible strength, the impact resistance, and the organic feel of carbon steel. Steels that I've used or had Bowie knives in, a lot of 10 series, like 1095, 1075, 1084, 01. I've used 5160. I've used some like L6, the SAW type steels. And there's all sorts of really good high carbon steels out there. And pretty much any one of them will make you a really good Bowie knife if they're properly heat treated. You can negate any advantage of any good steel by improper heat treatment. Heat treatment is key. Now, you will choose the steel for your Bowie knife based on what your personal priorities are. If you want more edge holding, maybe go for an 01 or a 1095 and make sure it's properly heat treated, of course. If you want more toughness for a chopper or something like that, or more flexible strength, you're really going to go out in the woods and pound on it, use 5160 or a 1075. Again, make sure the heat treatment is done right. What about stainless steels? Well, what about stainless steels? I'm not big into stainless steels. I'm sure there's guys out there making big knives and things out of stainless steel and doing a good job of it. I'm not one of them. Bear in mind, stainless steels are a fairly recent invention. The last 50 or 70 years has seen the advent of stainless steel. So most of man's history with ferrous alloys has been with plain carbon steel or iron, i.e. items that will rust in the elements. Now, regular old carbon steel doesn't start self-destructing when it's out in the rain or out in the snow. It's not that delicate. It's pretty tough stuff. You just got to take care of it. You'd even have to take care of a stainless steel knife, because stainless steel stains less. It's not rust-proof or corrosion-proof. You've still got to take care of your knife regardless. The bottom line is you pick a steel that suits your use of your knife. Make damn sure it's heated correctly. Take good care of it. Flitz helps. And go on with life. Be happy with it. Okay, let's talk about blade length. Blade length is going to vary given a person's physical size, their hand strength, their preference, and what they're used to. I personally prefer knives, or Bowie knives, in the length of 10.5 to 11 inches. You want to nail me down? I'd say most of the knives I make for myself that have the best feel for them are 10 3/4 to 10 7/8 inches. I've used longer knives, I've used shorter knives, but those are the ones that feel best to me. Okay, what about shorter knives? Bill Bagwell in his book talks about a 9 1/4 or 9 1/2 inch Bowies kind of being the lower limit, and I strongly agree. This is a 9 1/4 inch Bowie. It's an old Trailmaster, it's been sharpened some. It feels a little bit stubby to me. So does the regular 9 1/2 inch one. 9 1/2 or 10 inches feels a little bit stubby to me because I'm used to a bigger knife. That's fine. Okay? What about knives shorter than 9 inches? Well, this is an 8 inch knife. This is way stubby. In my opinion, this isn't a Bowie knife. Anything below 9 inches, even 9 inches is kind of pushing the limit. Anything below 9 inches isn't really a Bowie knife because it will not do the things that a Bowie knife is known to do. Therefore, it is not a Bowie knife, in my opinion. And also look at it. This is an 8 inch knife. This is a really well constructed knife, though it's ugly. one I made several years ago. It's got a through tang construction, nice and wide through tang, and has a stacked leather grip, peened at the bottom like the peen through tang construction like I like. It's got a nice feel. It weighs 17.1 ounces. Only has an 8-inch blade. This weighs 17.3 ounces and has almost 3 inches on it. What I'm saying is, if you have a properly constructed knife, a knife that's built tough, you've already got most of the weight in that handle, an 8-inch blade or 7-inch blade or whatever it is. You might as well have a longer knife because you've already got the weight. This is a piece of a Bowie knife I intentionally broke. It's a 2 3/4 inch piece of the tip, and it weighs 1.10 ounces. That's not very heavy. What I'm saying with that is, shorter knives, not really worth it. You're already paying the price and weight. You might as well have the blade length. That's possible through distal tapering. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Okay, how about longer knives? How long is too long? This is my 11 7/8 Ames Rifleman reproduction. You've seen this in a couple other videos. This was my go-to knife. I used this hard for a while, and gee, it had a lot of things going for it, but it also had some drawbacks. These knives, 10 7/8, they work so well for me, I don't miss the extra inch. I don't say, I'm not cutting something, or doing back cuts or whatever, and I say, geez, I wish I had that extra inch blade. I don't miss it because these fit me so well. And I think once you find what your personal preference is for a blade length, I think you'll have the same experience. Excuse me. Again, Bagwell sets the lower limit is 9 1/4 and 9 1/2, and one of my experiments I'm going to do this year is to make a minimum size, minimum weight Bowie, and see if I can get it to do, some of the cuts that a bigger Bowie will do. I don't expect it to do everything, but I also expect it to be a lot of bang for my buck, or for the weight, so to speak. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think I can maybe get maybe a backpacker's Bowie out of it. Even if you're a big guy, the compact Bowie is not a bad place to start if you don't really have a preference. Grab a 9 1/2 inch blade, start using it, see how it works for you. All right, let's talk about blade thickness. Now, I am a fan of heavier blade stock. 1/4 inch is pretty much my minimum. But that does not mean I want a heavy, awkward crowbar that drags on my belt. Bear in mind, no matter how thick the steel is, it could be 1/2 inch thick, but if it's poorly heat treated, you've just negated any advantage of that heavy stock. Heat treat can help you or hurt you. When it's done right, it's going to help you. When it's done poorly, it's going to hurt you. Many people will take a piece of 3/8 inch stock, take a piece of 3/8 steel, cut a Bowie knife profile out of it, and say, look, Ma, I made a Bowie knife. This is a 1/2 inch thick trainer. It weighs 4.5 pounds. It's from mild steel. This is twice as heavy as any Bowie knife I will ever make. But the thickest blade stock isn't necessarily what you want. I like 1/4 inch, 5/16. This is right between 5/16 and 3/8. But notice something. The thickest part of the blade is right here, and the spine and the tang transition. You take the material and you put it where it needs to be. You put it where it needs the strength and shock resistance. And then you taper the blade forward with a distal taper in accordance with the proper use of that knife, or the purpose that you have in mind for that knife. If it's going to be like a survival knife or a woods knife or something like that, you want it to be strong and have a lot of chopping power, you leave more weight in the steel. Your taper is more gradual. If you want a lighter, quicker, faster fighting knife, that sort of thing, you taper it a little bit more severe. You have a little bit more, you take a little bit more weight from the distal end of the knife. A caution about that, though. Bear in mind that when you have, a blade 10, 11 inches long, you can generate a lot of power. And you need to have sufficient thickness in that steel at the end so it will stand up to that power that's generated. So you don't break off your point or really bung up your point when you're chopping or doing other things like back cuts. Okay, what about too thin? This is my Ames knife again. This is about 2/10 of an inch, which is slightly over 3/16. This is a bit thin. It makes up the weight and the heft by blade length and by having a saber grind. But this is a bit thin. Lacks a bit of authority. What about thinner? Thinner like this. Well, if you go too thin, you start having problems with backing up the edge here, chopping and stuff like that. You don't have enough meat behind the edge to avoid edge deformation on certain materials like you get after pine knots and things like that. You go thinner still, and basically what you've got is a short machete. Short machetes are really good tools, but the difference between a short machete and a Bowie knife, this one is disposable, this one is not, as far as I'm concerned. Good short machetes are good tools, but they're not exactly Bowie knives. Also remember, we talked a lot about, I prattled on a lot about stress risers on tangs. Guess what you don't want on the actual blade of your Bowie knife? You don't want any stress risers. The most common stress riser is saw teeth. Saw teeth, in my opinion, on a good Bowie knife are a waste of time and almost a sacrilege to a good tool. All they're gonna do is serve to weaken that Bowie knife at a critical point. And a well-made Bowie knife with a good grind is gonna out-chop those saw teeth all the time because you're only gonna have a limited amount of them. Now, there are some really good folding saws out there. Gerber makes one, Silky makes a bunch of really good aggressive saws. Have a saw. Or, you want a saw, you want to carry one lightweight, a lightweight saw to carry. Take a peg-to saw blade and tape it on the inside of your belt and just wear it in the woods. You can take your Bowie knife, make yourself a frame, carry that 2-ounce saw blade, and have both a good saw and a good Bowie knife for relatively no weight. Alright, blade width. Blade width. Do we really want a canoe paddle? I don't know about all that. I am starting to prefer a moderate width Bowie. I made this knife, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, and I thought it was an okay knife at the time, but I was like, it's a little narrow. It lacks a little bit of authority. So I started making a few wider Bowies like this one. And this one's okay. It has a nice feel in the hand, but I've actually gone back to a moderate width Bowie that keeps a little bit more meat in the spine, and instead of having the steel along the longitudinal axis of the blade, I keep the same amount of steel in the cheeks of the grind. Remember how you talk about the cheeks of an axe on the grind? The cheeks of the grind. I have basically a thicker convex grind in this knife than I do with this one, and a little bit more material in the spine. I find that works a lot better. The weight on these two knives, 21.4 ounces, 21.35, depending on the day when I weigh them. There's a 1/10 of an ounce difference. The construction is kind of similar, but the way the knife feels due to the difference in width is very different. They both feel good in the hand, but at the same time, it's going to be a personal preference on which width and which feel that an individual prefers. What about too slim? Well, if you go like below an inch, or even an inch, inch and an eighth, or something very narrow like that, you're going to start to reduce the weight of it. And also, if you have thick stock, you're going to reduce the area that you have to develop the edge bevels. You can still pull it off and come up with a neat little tool, but it almost becomes more like a needle or a specialized thrusting Bowie, which is, not necessarily a bad thing. I just think you're going to lose a little bit of authority when it comes to your carving cuts, your chopping cuts, things like that. Alright, let's talk about blade shape. Blade shape is pretty critical. If you look at the old references like Norm Flaterman's book and the Antique Bowie Knife book and things like that, you're going to find an endless variety of shapes of Bowie knives. And also, we all know that back in the day, any shape was a Bowie knife. Any big knife was a Bowie knife. If somebody murdered me with this, I was killed with a Bowie knife. Or a Bowie type knife. Now, for my purposes, and when I say Bowie knife, what I mean is a clip point. A well-designed, properly executed clip point. In my opinion, spear point buoys and weight trailing point buoys and things like that, they're not proper Bowie knives. They're Bowie knife-like objects because they won't do everything a Bowie knife is supposed to do. Now, a well-executed clip point with a false edge or a swedge, it lightens the front of the knife more than a spear point buoy would because you're taking off more material. It gives incredible piercing ability, and it's pretty damn strong. We're going to talk more about clip points in a little bit. But Also, don't sell that clip point short. Tantos and all that, yeah, they'll do some of the same jobs, but the clip point, it gives you a nice, fine, strong point, gives you good back cut ability, and there's second to none in my opinion. Okay, what about edge grind? I'm not going to talk about the various grinds like the Scandi grind and all that kind of thing that you can use on any kind of cutlery. I'm going to talk about grinds that you'd see on a good Bowie knife. Now, I prefer a convex grind. This is what I call a medium convex. Granted, that's going to be open to certain people's interpretation. I call this a medium convex. This one is actually a fairly light convex, or a fine convex. This knife is a flat grind with a convex edge. You could also run a flat grind with a secondary edge bevel that's either very acute or very obtuse, depending on your purposes. With that, if you want a nice fine slicing ability, you want a nice razor edge on it, you want fine cutting, and you want to be able to shave with it, things like that, make that angle acute. But bear in mind, when you're chopping and things like that, doing rougher tasks, you could suffer some edge damage, depending on your heat treatment. Even if the heat treatment is good, you can still damage your edge if it's too delicate, because, again, there's a lot of power generated with these knives. You need to have an edge that's thick enough and robust enough to withstand it. Now, another thing you could do is have a secondary edge bevel that's rather abrupt. That will take that abuse. That's pretty much how Trailmasters are delivered from the factory. This one has a flat grind and a convex edge, which is not a bad idea. It kind of gives you the best of both worlds. But I much prefer the convex. This knife has a finer convex edge than this, and it actually chops pretty good. I had to reconfigure the edge once, and because it was a bit too thin, but I kind of cut it back a little bit, stocked it up, and it works pretty well. Now, make sure that you select an edge grind that works for you. I don't go out and try to do tough work on hardwood with a delicate edge grind. You're just going to suffer some disappointment and some edge damage. It's not going to help you. Okay, well, we've talked about edge grinds. We've talked about the length of the blade and distal tapering and things like that. So now we've pretty much got the total package. With the tang, the guard, the handle, and the distally tapered blade well executed, the resulting knife that you get is far greater than the sum of its parts. What you've got with a well-made Bowie is you've got a sharp, strong, relatively lightweight, and easily carried tool that you can make a variety of cuts with. It's got sufficient reach and power to make cuts and perform tasks that are out of proportion to its size and weight. In some cases, the things that you can do with a Bowie knife, a good Bowie knife, in skilled hands is pretty freaking amazing. Now, as a tool, you can blaze a trail. You can cut shelter poles, make any sort of camp widget, whittle stakes, cut a tree out of the road, make traps, anything you find necessary. You can do it pretty easily with a Bowie knife. In addition to, and not opposed to this, you've got a knife that is fast and deadly, capable of delivering powerful thrusts, snap cuts, and back cuts, any one of which is potentially deadly or disabling in a fight, any one of which could stop that encounter. Good Bowie knives can do it all. They really can. Some are bred to one purpose more than another, but there's a lot of crossover. You could have a full tilt fighting Bowie, very light, very fast, very fine point, razor sharp clip point for back cutting, or you could have a really heavy duty survival Bowie. Well, you could still fight with either one. The fighting knife is going to be a little bit light for the most part as far as chopping and stuff, but you could still do work with one in an emergency. Personally, I prefer what I call an 80-20. These are all pretty much 80-20s. It's 80% an everyday carry tool, a woods chopper, a survival knife, a general purpose large knife. It retains enough of the key features of the Bowie's combat mode, I guess, to give me a superior fighting knife when I need it. The way I look at it is, if this knife is a good tool, I'm going to carry it. And when knives get carried, they become weapons in an emergency, that sort of thing. If I don't value this knife as a tool, I'm not going to carry it, therefore I'm not going to have it when I need it. I think that kind of makes sense. So the 80-20 is kind of where I concentrate on. You have enough fighting characteristics to carry you through. Sure, if you want to be absolutely realistic, you could call it a 99.9 and a .01. But I call it an 80-20 because I like a sharpened clip. I like a little bit finer balance. I like a nice double guard. Things like that. I like nice handling. Now, let's talk about Bowie combatives briefly. I'm not going to get deeply into it. Good Bowie knife combatives focus on a well-executed, timed thrust. Snap cuts and back cuts are good techniques. Snap cuts and back cuts are good to know. Good techniques. But they supplement and reinforce the primary tool of the thrust. What makes the Bowie superior in the thrust is the design of that clip point. It's pretty friggin' sweet. Basically, what you want with the clip point is you want a shallow curve and a low point. You don't want my finger being the point. You don't want a trailing point. You don't want a point that goes right off into nothing. You don't want a point that is too low. But you do want a low point. You want just enough curve in that clip point to make a shallow claw, but not come too far up. You want to have that point low enough so you can deliver an accurate thrust with it. The false edge or swedge needs to be an abrupt grind, a thick or obtuse grind like this. Don't think straight razor, think plow or chisel. That plow, the plow on the plow-like or chisel-like grind on the back edge, when doing a back cut, plows its way through flesh. It cuts a furrow of flesh. Say that 5 times fast. Cuts a furrow of flesh, opens it up for the slicing tip, and then it's raked back through with the arm motion of the back cut. This point really complements the body's motions of the back cut. It focuses the power of your moving body as well as this blade onto a relatively small portion of the blade, and you draw it through the target. All the while this is going on, your body motion to deliver the back cut keeps your arm and your body safer from counterattack by the nature of the delivery of the back cut. That was a little wordy and maybe a bit complex, but back cuts are kind of complex and kind of simple at the same time. There's a lot to this clip point that makes a back cut worth knowing. And in my opinion, the clip point and the back cut are part of what makes a Bowie knife worth carrying. Okay, what about, you want more than that on back cuts? 3 words, James A. Keating. Go see him. The snap cut. A snap cut is a pretty neat cut too. Again, supplements the thrust. You learn the thrust first. You learn these later. You're basically thrusting with your edge. You're delivering a heavy, very heavy cleaving / chopping blow with the front edge of the primary edge geometry of your knife. You're doing this at distance, at great speed, and without the need to come in close and really do a power slash. You're doing that from way out here. Bang, bang. Other knives could probably deliver a blow that heavy, but not at the distance, not with that speed. That's why, or that's when, that convex edge geometry really shines, because it really will maximize the use of the length of the blade and the speed and movement of your body, and produce a really telling effect. Okay, well, there it is, kind of in a nutshell. You know about points, you know about the distal taper, you've considered blade width and thickness and heat treatment. You already know about the tangs, you already know about the gauge, you already know about handles and things like that. Is there more to it? Yeah, there is. But that's pretty much the basics on what a good Bowie knife is all about. But there's more to it, as far like you could make a science or a big study of the use of the trapping guards. which adds a whole nother level of understanding to what makes that mechanics work. And it does work, and it works damn well. Also bear in mind that, sure, there are other knives that can do what Bowie knives do. Daggers and tantos and all that other stuff. But when Bill Bagwell tells you, hey, the Bowie knife will make all these cuts and the back cut too, he means it. You may think I'm just regurgitating things I read from Bagwell's book, but bear in mind, I was doing knife experiments at the time I found Bagwell's articles in Soldier of Fortune, and I took a lot of his words to heart and went out and did the work behind it. And damn if the man ain't right. He is absolutely right. He's probably more right than he knew at the time. And Bill, a lot of Bill's words rang true with me. Yeah, the longer blades are very efficient when you make them correctly. If you have a large untapered knife, like a lot of commercial Bowie knives are made, you're never going to realize how freaking awesome a Bowie knife can perform for you. Okay, I think that's about it. There's going to be a few more videos coming down the pike, but that pretty much wraps up the blade section. I hope that kind of brings everything together for you. There'll still be more coming as far as different videos and things like that. I'm going to do some chopping. I've said that a couple of times, but we'll do it. Other things I need to mention. You've heard about the back cut. You've heard about the thrust. You've heard about the snap cut. We get involved with the back cut. It's kind of I've heard people refer to it as a glam technique. It's not really a glam technique. Learn it, use it, understand it. You'll understand the value of it. And the snap cut, very valuable. But remember, it all comes off that time thrust. If you can't do a time thrust right, your back cut isn't going to do you any good. That snap cut's not going to do you any good. It's all about the timing. And like Forrest Gump, that's all I have to say about that. If you want to learn more about the timing of the thrust and all that, you need to go see James Keating at Comtech. But I think that's all I have for today. Oh, you know what? I forgot one thing. An addendum. Talking about guards and all that. This is a Cold Steel Trailmaster. Don't think I'm bad-mouthing the Cold Steel Trailmaster. These are really good production knives. Something I want to point out, this is an old, if you look at the Ricasso, you can tell this is a fairly old Trailmaster. I got this when I was in, I think, junior high or high school. This is made the old way. This is like the third handle I've had on this. Back in the day, the brass guards were spot welded to a small piece of angled steel that was, again, spot welded to the tang. They were very rigid. They stayed in place real well. Guards today are just slip fit and held in place by this rubber handle. You can actually pull that guard down. So if you're counting on this for hand protection, a hard blow could come in and actually strike your finger with the back of the guard as it moves. It could push that guard down into your fingers. I just wanted to point that out. That was something that a modification, or I guess a downgrade in the construction of the Trailmaster I wanted to point out. It doesn't make the Trailmaster a bad knife. The Trailmaster is still a damn good knife. But just be aware that guard's not as solid as it once was. Now, this guard is reinforced by that micarta handle. So I don't think that's going to go anywhere. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this little series of videos on Bowie knives. Like I said, we're going to talk about a few other aspects going into it. But I've kind of enjoyed doing it, even though I prattle on and get a bit tongue-tied at times. It's all here. A lot of this stuff is in my head, and I do it extemporaneously, and